Thank you so much, Patience. I am also a fan of yours, so the feeling is mutual. I'm also a huge fan of the two wonderful folks that I get to share some time with today. Um, Donald and Nicole, I am in awe of both of you um, for your commitment to community and for your work in getting folks housed and presenting the opportunity to our community to own a home. But I know that for you all and for me that this is personal. So I would love to just start with our why we do this work. And I would love to start with you, Donald. Uh, what is your why?
I have some personal whys, and also have just what I feel is my societal obligation whys. When I think about the legacies and the lost opportunities for Black home ownership, Black land ownership, I think about the outright theft of land that has impacted my family greatly from my great grandfather, Pullman Porter on the Great Smoky Mountain Railroad, worked off season in Detroit, earning a great deal of money at Henry Ford's first automobile assembly line, and took that money back to Asheville and invested in property in Georgia in the South. Had to actually purchase that property through a white friend. When the White Citizens Council found out about it, he was given 24 hours to get out of town. We lost that property as a family. That was a lost legacy, and a real negative point in part of why I do this work is to really turn that negative into positives, and beginning to make sure that one, the Black community as a whole loses no more land. And right now we're under the threat of losing land through gentrification and displacement from central cities. Longer story there than I'll choose to get into now, but I've taken this on as a personal mission, primarily due to my own personal experience in the loss of wealth creation in my family through land ownership and home ownership.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate the time and honored to be in this space. And, I echo Donald's sentiments. I am, Generation X and grew up and born and raised in the Central District, and to watch my neighborhood just completely be decimated in my lifetime. It was challenging. It was hard. It was emotional to see, my entire family were homeowners when I was growing up. That was something that was normal to me as a child. I didn't understand why that was happening, redlining, discrimination. I heard the stories later about how they were able to become homeowners, having to leave their neighborhoods and go to hard money lenders, pooling money as a community, as a family to purchase homes. We lived on a compound, if you will, when I grew up, where we had 3 or 4 generations living on this compound in 3 houses. And so being able to have that home ownership was key for my, for really framing my adulthood, right? So when I came through, and my dad was a real estate broker, so it was very much ingrained in me. But to see the change, to see the loss, to Donald's point, of wealth, to see the communities that when I was growing up, it was community and everyone knew everyone on the block and everyone was family and friends. And then as I grew older, hearing people come and knock on my grandparents' door, hey, this white man came and knocked on my door and offered to pay me X amount of dollars. Another one, this white man came in and knocked on my door and offered to pay my back taxes, right? So we started to see these things and not understanding what that looked like, but it was a concerted effort to push people out of the community. And so I really felt like this was a work that was put forth for me, a path laid out, because my faith is the thing that guides me, leads me, and I believe that this is my kingdom work. This is what I was put on this earth to do. And so supporting my community through this opportunity is not just about, the buying and selling real estate as a real estate broker, not just about, providing opportunity as a banker, being in banking for 30 years. This is transformational community work, because the Black community deserves better than what we've got. And we need to have the opportunity to change the narrative in a real way. And also to Patient's point, that's through policy, it's through advocacy, it's through coalition building, it's through this kind of work. And it's important that we do this work. And for me, it is personal, it is spiritual, and I have to leave a legacy for my girls. I have 3 young Black women I'm raising, and it's important that even in a little bit, if I can change it a little bit, so they don't have to deal with maybe 2% of the things I had to deal with, that's a win for me. So I really want to be able to provide that opportunity, and these platforms are how we do that.
Nicole, you mentioned your dad briefly, but we're talking about lost legacies. I want you to tell us a little bit more about the legacy your father and your family have on home ownership. Just if you don't mind sharing.
Absolutely. My father was a real estate broker in the Central District, one of very few. He came through the business in a really hard time. It was hard to be a Black man in real estate. It's hard enough to be Black in any space, but to be a Black man in real estate in Seattle was challenging. But a lot of people on this call probably know Paul Bascom, and he never met a challenge he didn't like. And so he was determined to, one, break down those barriers for his girls. He had 5 girls, but he brought us along on this journey. We were at open houses, we were at board meetings, we were at these events where my dad made it very clear that this is how you make change. And that is important that we use the capacity that we're given, our innate abilities, to make those changes. And so he was pivotal in doing that. He was pivotal in the community. My dad was a community member. He supported many different efforts. And there was an opportunity when he passed away suddenly. Had I not been in a position to take over our business, we would have lost that. And we know in the Black community, passing businesses on, having that legacy is something that doesn't necessarily exist in our community on a larger scale. And so being able to take over our family business means so very much to me, so that if my children want it, it's there. I have a sister who works with me, it's there. Out of 5 daughters, my dad had 4 of us are licensed in commercial and or residential. This is a lasting legacy that Paul Bascom started. And that started from his father and mother coming out of Alabama, bringing their family here to Seattle, knowing no one, building real roots and community. We too lost land in Alabama when we came here, taken from the powers that be in that space. That's lost legacy. That's lost generational wealth. And so my dad made it very clear that in seeing these things happening, we do everything we can to try to make a change and ensure that that doesn't happen again as we move, in the future.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. I just hope that we hold on to those stories in our community and those people that have poured into this community so much. And Donald King, you are one of those people that have poured into this community, and we are so grateful for you. Can you tell us more about the Nehemiah Initiative? And I would also love, because we are certainly talking about lost legacies, yes, but you are also pouring into the next generation. So I would love for you to share that as well.
Sure. And want to also comment on Paul Bascom. Paul Bascom was a friend and business partner. We were in development together. Paul had the foresight to actually purchase property at a time when he could in the Central District, which really to the benefit of Nicole and her siblings. So I can't say enough about Paul and the legacy that he's left too. So I wanted to say that. And talk a little bit about the Nehemiah Initiative and how I saw a great opportunity for Black churches to, one, begin to resist the temptation to sell their property and leave the central city, particularly when many didn't have the plan of what to do once they sold the property and they had the proceeds from that property. Many found that it didn't work for them. But one of the things that Nehemiah started out with is talking to churches about that experience, particularly those churches that were on the fence and saying, we don't know whether we should sell our property and move, and if we move, where do we move to, and how much funding and proceeds do we need to be able to reestablish somewhere else. this became a conversation with churches and church leaders way beyond just the practical issues of whether or not they should sell and move, but also what the mission of the church was. And the mission of the Black church for over 200 years now has been to build community. And what they've found is when they are uprooted and dispersed and creating a literally a new diaspora for African Americans, is where is community? Where is community geographically? We know that we have community of affinity, and we know that we have people that will come back to church or come to church wherever church is, because it is a community builder. The Black churches is our largest social network in the Black community, and a builder of communities, and has been that strong strength in central cities since the Great Migration of over 100 years ago. And when we found out that churches were on the fence about it, we said, well, why not stay central? Why not stay in the city? Why not be able to benefit from the struggles that you've had in amassing the land that you've had purchased with cash? Because you have to remember that many of these churches purchased property in redlined areas when they could not get a loan. Not even the largest, not even Mount Zion could get a loan in 1974 to build their new sanctuary. Had to build it with cash raised from their congregation. So we know that this property is dear to the churches, but we also know that this property is also in high valued neighborhoods and is owned outright with much of it's debt free. It's largely underutilized. And we were able to put two and two together, saying, one, let's make sure we set a priority of being able to save this community institution, this network builder, this community builder for African Americans, but also being able to build affordable homes on this property that these churches have amassed, which is collectively and community held property. And how can we use this property? How can we repurpose it to be able to save the institution and save the congregates of the institution from the threat of displacement? So the Nehemiah Initiative has been about that and about that idea for the past 5 years now. And now, as we look at the opportunities of the utilization of this land and the repurposing of this collectively held community property, we find that it fits well with the ideas of Black home ownership and how we can apply Black home ownership in our first 4 sites that we're looking at to develop.
I love that. Thank you. You two, people often these days, our future generations are, I work with many of them, brilliant minds, but many of them say home ownership is not their pathway to wealth. It's not for them. What is our response to that? Nicole, we'll start with you.
That's a great question. And I asked my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's 25. She's part of that generation, and she's a homeowner because, that education was provided and she saw that legacy. And I made it a point to teach my kids this. And my middle daughter is also a homeowner, but their generation has a lot of fear. Some of them, the older millennials, saw their parents lose their homes during the Great Recession. Some of them have come up and have more ties to home with their parents, so they feel like maybe they don't have to do it individually. Generation X was a totally different generation where that was kind of how we moved on and were able to do that because we grew up in a different way. And so a lot of it is education and trying to abate those fears around what it looks like to be a homeowner and giving them the tools and the opportunity to understand why it's important. And so that's part of my work that I do, is really working with young people to educate them why this is important, the legacy and history of why this is important, and how this is going to affect you personally. And one thing I know about, as being a mom and having young people is that they don't really understand theory, right? They understand practice. And so when they see things in practice and see a story that has played out, and they see, okay, this is real, this is quantifiable, this is, I can touch it, feel it, taste it. Those are the ways that I help to dissuade, their thoughts around what that looks like. This is how I did. I was a single mom who, for much of my adulthood, didn't have two nickels rubbed together, as old people would say. I struggled, but homeownership is what allowed me to take that step, because I knew I bought my home as soon as I graduated from college. I bought a townhouse, and that allowed me to leverage. Now, we have that other story of lost wealth through appraising, which I have been affected by, and that is very much a real thing. I've lost a lot of my personal wealth because of biased appraising and discrimination. But the reality is, at least I still had it. I had it to, help my daughters go through college, so they didn't have the student loan burdens that I had, to be able to help them purchase their homes and do those things. I did that all with my home. There was no generational wealth in my family. I couldn't go to my father or my grandparents and say, hey, can I get a down payment? Can I help with that support? I had to do that on my own. And so leveraging my home allows me to do that for my children. And so I give them practical reasons why it's important, show them the real, hands-on, this is what this looks like. It can be done. The news freaks people out, scares people to death, particularly around homeownership. Rates are crazy. We live in one of the most expensive places in the country, but even here, we can still do it. We had our Realtors Gala this past Saturday, and I brought one of my clients, a young lady, 26 years old, who bought her first house. And these are the stories that I want to tell, and I bring them here and bring them forth because they need to see that. And so I think it's really important that we continue to share these stories, provide these narratives, but give them the actual, real, tangible stories around why this is important. And it is helping to, shift the thought process with some of them.
Amen. Amen. Donald, what do we tell our young people? Why is
Well, yeah, to make it a little bit more personal too, God, it's been maybe 15 years or more. My youngest daughter and her husband were renters and thought that it may just be easier to stay renters. They didn't really trust the complexity of home ownership, felt that, well, maybe it's not for them. They did eventually begin to look at it. And I humored them by saying, just go out to a bank, find out how much you're worth. I was surprised at that time when loans were easier to get, when property values were still more affordable. They were approved for a loan and they purchased their first home. They're now on their second home, and not only on their second home, but have doubled up their payments for years and have it almost paid for. So they understand the value now of home ownership, but there are many that feel that same way with the added struggle and complexity of the value and the cost of homes gone up to the point to where it seems unaffordable to them. I think part of the job that we have of the Black Home Ownership Initiative is to spread the word that there is possibilities and opportunities for you to be a homeowner when many feel that it's completely out of their reach. So I think part of it now is just the idea that this is never going to be for me. This continues to be pushed out of my reach, and I have to contend with the idea that I'll be a renter forever. And I'm an advocate for universal home ownership. I think everyone should be able to own a home. If you can pay rent, you should be able to pay a mortgage because you are paying a mortgage for the landlord, right? So if you don't want to do that, that's completely understandable. I think we want to provide choice and opportunity in the Black Home Initiative, and also, make sure that if it is possible and we can find ways to do that, that we can encourage more people to consider home ownership and the benefits of it. I think many, having not had a legacy of it, maybe they weren't ever living in a home that was owned by their parents or their grandparents and have not had that personal experience. I think that's our job as well in being able to let them know what those opportunities and benefits are from home ownership. But also make sure that there's choices in how you can own, how you can rent to own, how you can own in cooperative and condo settings, and maybe something we haven't even considered.
Yeah,
So how
I,
do we really begin to look at new choices and new opportunities?
I agree. I'll also add that many of our young people are so burdened with student loan debt that they think that that burden has taken them out of the possibility of even owning their own home. So I think as we discuss home ownership policies, we also have to address the disparities in student loan debt and advocate for changes in those policies as well, because that impacts the opportunities for people to own their own home. I am one of those people. I was, burdened with student loan debt. I thought that, I'll be paying student loan debt forever. Why would I pay a mortgage?
Mm,
Unfortunately, it wasn't until my father became an ancestor to where I was given a little bit of money from his passing that paid off my student loan debt and became a homeowner. So I think that we also have to make sure that that is a part of this conversation as well. And our
Good,
time,
good point, Michelle.
yeah, our time together was short. Before I pass it back, any final thoughts or words? I appreciate you all so much.
Well, I just say to, everyone on this call, leverage your capacity, your ability, your privilege, your worth to ensure that we move this needle, because what we know is a rising tide raises all boats. When we make Black homeownership and bring parity and equity to Black homeownership, the issue goes away in this country. And so I want us to be clear about the work that we're doing, focusing on this initiative and being able to make this happen, because I know that here in the Pacific Northwest, we can be a model for the country and how we can change this across our nation to help support the Black community so that we are on parity and all other communities are on parity with each other. And the opportunities are there. So I just want to thank everyone for being here, but don't just be here just to, be on the screen or, be here to listen, but see where you can plug in and help us do this work. So thank you, everyone.
Donald?
Great. Well, thank you, Nicole. Why is this work imperative? I think is part of what Patience was able to open up with on, a change in policy, primarily because it's a corrective act. This work is imperative because America has intentionally excluded a large segment of its population from the opportunities, intentionally excluded with policy, with law, to deny access to full rights of citizenship. And among those opportunities is to build wealth through home ownership. That's why this work is imperative.
Amen. Amen. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues, and I just encourage you all to raise your voices and echo, share stories. This is personal for so very many, and I ask that you be an echo chamber, both in policy and in practice, to make sure that our communities, Black communities, communities of color, people who think that home ownership is not for them, that they see it, that they believe it, and that they have access to it. And so I thank you for being here and for doing this work. And I will pass the microphone back to Patience, I think.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Donald and Nicole, for that grounding conversation, hearkening us back to the why we're doing this work and reminding us that we can only be more impactful doing this work together. Those of us with privilege, leveraging that and pushing for change. Those of you with power to influence policies, doing all you can to make those policies be changed. And we're truly grateful for you grounding us this morning. So we're turning gears, continuing in that grounded place to talk about the work that we can do together. And we're incredibly lucky in this community to have elected leadership that exemplifies those values. We'll be listening just briefly here to King County Council Member Gimais Halai, who was elected, I recall, in 2019. And when he was elected, he became the youngest member of the county council, and he also became the only Black sitting county council member in Washington state. Let that say something to you as a state overall. And since his election, he has been an outstanding champion for social and racial equity across the board, pushing for policies, pushing for programs to be adopted, and where we've really aligned and we believe we can have more voices amplifying his work is with this thought of producing a variety of affordable homes as we think of Black homeownership, and talking about some of the opportunities we have around our zoning policies, some opportunities we have around land acquisition overall. So with that said, I do want to pause and hand over to King County Council Members Halai to take it away from here, and then I'll come back to introduce another stellar champion who's with us this morning.
Hey, thank you so much, Patience. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you this morning. I'm excited to talk to you all about how I believe our region can produce a variety of affordable options for Black homeownership. So the question is, how do we create more affordable homes for Black people? And I like to divide it up into its three components: more affordable, more homes for Black people. So that's how I'm going to break it up in my remarks. So when we talk about things being more affordable, and sorry if this sounds elementary, it's just how my brain works, dividing it up. Law school kind of messed up my brain a little bit with things like that. But things can become more affordable either by reducing the price of something or increasing the amount of money that somebody has. And for countless systemic reasons, as we all know, Black people have less money and less access to capital to buy homes. So I'll spend less time talking about that topic because I don't think it's the focus of my section. But of course, it needs to be said, an important part of building the financial position of Black communities to be able to afford homes also means addressing poverty, school to prison pipelines, workforce development, reparations, equitable financing and loaning schemes from banks, guaranteed basic income, which my office has been working on, down payment assistance programs like the Covenant Reinvestment Account that Representative Chop has been working on. If we can think of ways for Black people to have more money and more access to capital in general, we will have more ability to purchase and own homes. Sorry if that sounds basic, but it needs to be said. More affordable is component number one. Component number two is more homes. More homes. We need home ownership opportunities, and that means we need more affordable homes available. And our region is in a housing crisis for so many reasons, not least of which is our restrictive zoning. As we all know, our original single family detached housing only zoning was originally conceived as a way to exclude Black families, and that zoning continues to segregate our neighborhoods today. And so if we can upzone certain areas to allow more homes to be built, that would in turn allow more homes, that would increase the supply, reduce prices, and increase home ownership opportunities as well. I'm working on a missing middle housing motion through the King County Council right now, and that would allow King County to do a review of its zoning policies and see where we can remove certain regulatory hurdles and burdensome requirements that we're putting on developers just to be able to build. We need more multifamily options to be able to be built in currently single family zoned areas. There are also options like lot splitting, which would allow homeowners to sell off part of their lot for the construction of another house. There are things we can do through our comprehensive plans, which are the frameworks for zoning and public investment. They define policy for the next 20 years. And if you can really use your comprehensive planning process to create abundant and affordable housing throughout Seattle and King County, you would really redefine this segregation paradigm that we have through our zoning policies right now. You can do things like equitable development initiatives, which allow you to put funding behind communities so they can own assets throughout the region. You can have anti-displacement strategies like we're doing in areas like Skyway. And also you can have, you can do a review of what surplus lands are publicly owned and try your best to transfer those publicly owned lands to communities that, to Black communities so they can have ownership opportunities. I'm working on something called the Youth Achievement Center with a bunch of organizations like Africa Town, Community Passageways, Creative Justice, and that was just one example of how we did a review of what publicly owned lands exist. We found out that Sound Transit has all these parcels of land around light rail stations around the region. We saw that those parcels of land were sitting there unused for decades. And I'm not exaggerating when I say decades. And so we worked with Sound Transit, and now we're in the process of transferring some of those parcels of land to Black organizations so that they can build homes for either youth or seniors or anyone in our communities who needs home ownership opportunities. So surplus land is a big one. There are housing benefits districts. I mentioned equitable zoning, missing middle housing, comprehensive plans. So there are a whole bunch of strategies that we can employ to make sure that that we increase housing supply, increase home ownership opportunities, increase access to capital, increase wealth, so that more Black people can own more homes. And then the last component is for Black people. I mentioned that we need things to be more affordable. We need more homes, increasing the supply. And the part that I feel like is missing too often from most of our policymakers is the for Black people part. So often we talk about something being for Black people, and then we turn it into for people of color. Remember, if you want to have Black people have more home ownership opportunities, then you need to say it's for Black people. Once you say, there's no problem with things being for people of color, but just state what your goal is. If your goal is broadly for people of color, that will inform how your policy moves and how successful it is. If you say you want to increase Black home ownership opportunities, the policies have to be targeted toward Black people. And even more missing from mainstream policymakers is the nuance within Black people. You know, there's the concept of disaggregation. If we're thinking about our Black communities in King County, multi-generational African Americans who have descended from enslaved people are going to face different systemic challenges than Black immigrants, for example. Black women might face different challenges than Black men. Black people with disabilities might face different challenges. Black LGBTQ people might face different challenges. And so we have to be very aware of which communities we are trying to assist with a particular program, and then shape those policies toward those communities in partnership with people who have trusted relationships within those communities. So I do think these levels of nuances and targeting for our communities are missing from many of our policy makers' frameworks. And so I just felt like that was an important component to talk about. More affordable, more homes for Black people. And what does for Black people mean to you? We need to be able to shape that as we shape our policies. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Zahalai. I would just reiterate, it's more homes, more affordable homes, and for Black people. I can't underscore how important it is for us to disaggregate the data when we get to talk about Black households in a broader umbrella, because currently the data we have is skewed in representing the inequities that we have in our systems, mainly because we account for the Black homeownership of immigrants or foreign-born people within that number. And if we were really to sieve through the data, we'll get to even more clarity in terms of how much of a disparity we're dealing with. So Councilmember Zahalai, thank you. And thank you for elevating the policies that we have included in the policy framework. We would like to keep time.
Patience, may I say?
Yes.
Sorry, and I always forget whenever I happen to mention policies that I've worked on. I didn't see there were certain people in this room that I collaborated with. So shout out to also, I mentioned Representative Chop, but also shout out to John Arthur Wilson, our King County assessor. Those kind of asset reallocation of publicly owned lands wouldn't be possible without his efforts. Also, shout out to Nicole Bascom. I think she's here too. We wouldn't be able to do some of our land transfer work without her work in Skyway. So as I'm seeing people's names, I want to give them a shout out, and there might be more as we move forward that I'll shout out. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing up Assessor Wilson with all of his work and thinking about the appraisal as well. And I know there are questions here that we would like to come back to in thinking about what changes need to be considered, given some of the recent news around concerns about appraisals across the nation. With that, I will move us along to introduce a true champion in our community. For 20 years, Representative Frank Chop served as Speaker of the House, and this is where he rallied people towards his vision of a one Washington on so many issues. But one issue that I know he's delivered on time and time again and again is the issue of affordable housing and addressing homelessness. He went to the state legislator as a community organizer. And when you get to work closely with Representative Frank Chop, you will see that that community organizer framework is well embedded in him. I think he talks about the 3 Ps, the people, the politics, and the policies. And each day we're working through and drafting a bill, we're thinking through those pillars and wanting to be sure that we can get these policies across the finish line. We have most recently been working with him on 2 major bills, but he will talk a little bit more about one that has a direct impact on Black households. And we're looking at creating the first in the nation model to increase funding that supports Black homeownership opportunities, in particular down payment assistance funding, as well as some capital dollars for the production of that housing and increasing more homes. So with that said, I will pause here, Representative Chop, and hand over to you to talk to us about the importance of funding in increasing Black homeownership.
Well, thank you very much, Patience. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Just wanted to check here. I'm in another conference. I just took a break from that, but I also want to follow Gurmai's lead and do some shout outs for folks. I really appreciate all the work that Patience has done, and Bambi, the 2 of them working with my legislative assistant, Jean Belmont, have really helped organize an effort during the last many months where we've been meeting every other week in order to advance a proposal to actually provide some resources to this important issue. I mean, I assume all people know here what the crisis is and also the history of this struggle. But now we need resources to actually match up with making a difference in terms of home ownership. So I do want to say that we were very fortunate in the legislature to have additional voices for housing. Emily Alvarado, I think, is on the call. She just got elected there. We also, in the House Democratic Caucus, identified literally housing and behavioral health as 2 top priorities for the caucus. And now we're working our tails off to get resources to match the rhetoric, basically. So we have a proposal which was originally called the Covenant Reinvestment Account. I changed it over to Covenant Home Ownership Account because home ownership has a warmer feeling than reinvestment. So it's the Covenant Home Ownership Account proposal. There's draft legislation, and I think a couple of the people who helped write that are on the call here today. We're really looking for us to come together over the draft legislation and have input as we shape it as we go forward. The legislative process doesn't start and end on the first day. The original proposals will get changed as we move through the sausage factory called the legislature. I've been really pleased with the involvement of the stakeholders. Usually about every 2 weeks, we have about 30 participants, including several of you. And we've reached out to lots of groups, lots of individuals, lots of public officials, et cetera. So there's a lot of excitement and support for this idea, but it ain't done yet. We need your help, and we'll get into that later about advocacy in the legislature, but need your help on fashioning the legislation to make sure it can be implemented. I share Gurmai's frustration with opportunities that have been sitting around for like decades and lost opportunities, but now we have to grab those opportunities and move forward. So we also have been working very hard on gaining legislative support. So in the state Senate, we have John Levick, very excited about sponsoring this legislation. And of course, Javier Valdez also is involved. On the House side, we've got several folks who are trying to figure out who will be the prime sponsor to move it forward in the best possible way. We're also fortunate to have some legal experts that are working with us on having this approach that can withstand court cases, because we're a litigious society, so we anticipate there might be lawsuits later on. And so the approach is more focused in on as a remedy or mitigation for past wrongs, as opposed to affirmative action for a preference. That's basically it. Because in Washington State, from the 1930s to the 1970s, these restrictive racist covenants were horrible. And if you want to see the actual language, which probably many of you already have, we gave some money to the University of Washington and Eastern Washington University to actually document the documents. And the state of Washington was involved in this thing proactively. We, the state and local governments, recorded all these racist documents. And then on 2 occasions, I understand that the state of Washington defended these practices at the state Supreme Court. We know the state Supreme Court, I think, will be on our side because they've asked experts in this field to present before them about a year ago about this crisis in terms of home ownership and the racist covenants that we have to overcome. So we have still ongoing discussions about the details of the proposal. For example, who's exactly eligible? And I think one logical thing is it's eligible for all those who are discriminated against between the 1930s and 1970s. But we're still working that out. I'd really enjoy working with all of you to how we do that. Now, eligibility is one thing. Outreach is the important thing, because we need your organizations to take the lead in identifying and I guess you could say recruiting potential homeowners, which we can then provide a lot of technical assistance and significant down payment assistance. At the same time, at the end of the thing, we also have to have homes that are affordable. I mean, otherwise, we just, get priced out of the market. So we appreciate working with Habitat, for example, on the supply part of it. Also, several of the rest of you, I don't want to call out too many. Donald King, for example, I've known him for many years, and he's helping on that, because part of that is to find the land and the actual buildings that we can convert into affordable housing and condominiums as well. So I appreciate what Gurmai said about the land. Land matters. So I passed a law that required sound transit. I didn't write it so that it's all the money, all the land has to be given over to Gurmai, but I thought about that. I think that might have been more direct, but I guess you can't do that in our state law. But at any rate, we passed a state law requiring sound transit.
I'll accept it, Frank Chop.
We have major sites all over King County for opportunities for affordable housing and other community services like El Centro's early learning programs, things like that, but also opportunities for home ownership. So we're working with Habitat and others to identify specific sites that can be used and we really need your help in doing these partnerships that Gurmai talked about, because the outreach, and we're willing to also put money into those nonprofit organizations in the community to make sure they do their outreach necessary to address the concerns that you all have. We also have a list of other properties that the state of Washington owns that we want to make available. And I don't want to go into it now, but it's acres and acres. And this issue of homeownership is not just Seattle, obviously, or King County. It's across the state. These covenants that were put in place were literally all over the state. That's why Eastern Washington University has also done research in terms of east in the mountains. It's important that we think through how we can actually implement this so that this thing will be successful. So that's the legal aspect of it, but also the affordability and the details of how the money is spent to connect the potential homeowner with an actual home. And that's, we could really use your help as we think through the best approach on that. So patients, have I exhausted my time?
I think you're still good. And I would like for you to expand a little bit about the value of people engaging around the housing trust fund during the state legislative session.
Yes, well, we need your advocacy with the legislature. Now, the legislators have indicated in our caucus, the House Democratic Caucus, that housing is a major priority. But prior to this year, it was almost totally focusing on rental apartments for those who are very low income, you know, the homeless and lower income people. And so we have a strong record of that, and we want to put more money into that, obviously. But we have to really need your advocacy to say, yes, this home ownership is incredibly important because of what the state of Washington did that was wrong. I mean, the language on these covenants are absolutely disgusting, and we should not ignore that. We should confront it and then constructively have a plan, which we are, you know, orchestrating here. So your advocacy needs to be strong, but also coordinated, because we want to make sure we have the right message, because not everybody is living in Seattle. Hate to break that to you, but people around the state, to some legislators, really don't like Seattle because they're, for any number of reasons, politically or whatever. So we need to have a strong proposal, which I believe we'll have, and then we need the clear message, and then basically stick to it and get the votes. Having been speaker for over 20 years, I know how we can get votes, and I think the House Democrats were in good shape. There'll be, you know, obviously serious questions about, well, what about this? Will this work? That kind of thing. But we need the numbers. This last year, I passed a program called Apple Health and Home, and we had, I think, about 350 people show up at a Zoom meeting at a hearing in the committee saying they desperately need this Apple Health and Homes, which is dealing with housing for the folks who are chronically homeless. That made a difference. People noticed that. So I mean, not everybody could testify in the interest of time, but numbers matter, causes matter, and stories matter. So I know that some of you on the call here, like Katisha, I think would probably bring forward quite a number of actual folks that could speak eloquently who would be directly impacted by this. It's not just a bunch of elected officials showing up. Who gives a crap about that? It's more important to get the people with real stories and the cause and the passion, but we got to be coordinated.
Absolutely. Well, this is a good time to open the floor and hear comments or questions from folks, both to Representative Chop as well as Councilmember Zahalai, with regards to what they shared and the work ahead of us, or just overall on this collective effort of increasing Black homeownership. I'm happy to call folks and put you on the spot or have you raise your hands overall. How about we start with Ketlin at Homestead. If you have any comments or thoughts that you would like to share.
That's somebody else who I should have shouted out, is Kathleen, for the work that we're doing together in Skyway. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, council member. Yeah, we're excited about our partnership with the community of Skyway to develop Brooks Village. We have a really visionary project that's setting a new standard for and a different form of equitable development. We are a truly community-driven homeownership project in the Skyway area, led by a Black-led community coalition. And it's going to be an exemplary project for both homeownership for the people of Skyway, the 98178 zip code, but it's also be a land conserved for green space, also stewarded by BIPOC-led organizations. So we're very excited about that, and we're excited to be working to expand on former speaker's chops worked to make surplus properties available. We have some technical fixes we need to make surplus properties more accessible to permanently affordable homeownership. But we're grateful for the foundational work that has been done so far on that. So more to come. We really want to be investing in more homes and increasing the supply that's within the reach of folks for all the reasons that Councilmember Zahai said in terms of people's lower incomes. We need homes that the market won't produce, the ones that are within reach of the people that we want to serve. So thank you all for your great work, and a big love to Nicole as well, who was an instrumental partner on the sales of our Village Gardens homes and her outreach to the community. So big love to her as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think what's been heartwarming about this work is the power of the network and the collaboration that's being demonstrated. So thank you for sharing that. I know we do have Anna who would like to share some of her thoughts, and I would like to invite her to do so. And as you do so, Anna, I want to throw a question to the audience and the panelists who just spoke about the concerns on appraisals. And Assessor Wilson, I'm glad you're here. Would love to also hear your perspective. We've seen most recently news article after news article, both local and at the national level, that it remains alive of a challenge, that people have to whitewash their houses in order to get a different appraisal. And we know from research after research that when Black households get access to home ownership, they typically do not get the same level of equity that you would get with any other household. And would love for us to think about how we begin to think about strategies more effectively around that. So Anna, why don't we go to you, and then we'll come back to Assessor Wilson on this topic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Patience. You kind of teed me up with your talk about the importance of the network. There are a lot of people on this call, and I don't believe all of you have signed on as an official Black Home Initiative network partner. In addition to the really important policy work we're doing, there are also work streams underway looking at the pipeline of mortgage-ready households, homes, and development projects. And would really like to make sure we have all of you looped into the network to be getting these updates, to be demonstrating publicly your support. I'm going to put in the chat, unless I saw Marty just did. We have been tracking logos of initiative partners on our website. That's going to be a really important demonstration of kind of the full community behind this effort when we go down to Olympia and talk to other stakeholders. So would love to get you all plugged in. I think that Alex Perry is on this call. So if Alex, if you could put your email in the chat as well, or I can do it when I stop talking. But if you are interested in more formally being listed as a partner, we'd love to have you send your logos and interests to Alex, and we can also answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Assessor Wilson, do you want to take it away here in talking about the appraisal challenges? Because I know this is a question that has been alive in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you, Patience. I really appreciate it. It is, and it is sadly a national issue, not a local issue. But as you all have seen from recent articles and that, especially in private sector field appraisal, it very much comes up with the embedded racial discrimination practices that you see in setting appraised values for refinancing mortgages and things like that. We're also very mindful of that in the assessment process. And in fact, I'm in the process right now. We're about to hire a senior level DEI manager for our department to start to look at our practices to make sure that they don't carry historic racial biases. You know, Frank Chop, my dear friend, is absolutely right of the just appalling provisions that have been in some of those zoning laws and that historically. You know, part of what we did as a department is early on, I had a young man working for me, Bailey Stober, who some of you probably know. And Bailey literally came in one day and he said, well, we got a problem. There are way too many people in this department that look like you, old white guys, you know. And part of what we did is we looked at why is that the case? And what we found, I think, is also true of what has happened in the private sector is the industry got obsessed with credentialization, but the credentialization historically discriminated against people of color and people who had not historically been part of the real estate industry. What we did is we did away with that credentialization initial criteria and looked more for skill set and ability to learn things and that. And what it did is it has significantly changed the composition of our workforce and the people that we have in the field. So we have a much more, frankly, diversified field team than we had 6 years ago. And we have a more diversified management team. And what we hope all that will do is start to bring people that bring a fresh set of eyes with the learned experience and the historic experience of coming out of communities that have been historically disadvantaged, and hopefully start to break down some of that siloing and racial siloing that has a terrible impact. We also very want to work with, former Speaker Chop and others on trying to figure out how can we deal with this. Is one of the things we've been in discussions over the last 2 years with Representative Harris Talley, who, as you all know, did not seek re-election this year. But we want to nevertheless kind of pick up her bill. And I shared, I think, Bambi, with you some comparison stuff that you're welcome to share with others on taking her original bill of 1494 and moving it forward into something that deals with displacement and encourages home ownership and provides even homeowners, especially first-time homeowners, working class homeowners, some property tax break, and does that, frankly, by shifting some of the property tax burden onto those who can more afford to pay it. Our property tax system has equity problems in it that we have to deal with, including such as my dear friend, Councilmember Zahale mentioned, the missing middle. We've got to make sure, for example, how do we deal with that, promote greater racial equity, more housing than that, but not end up creating more unaffordable housing as we fill in that missing middle. So those are some of the things that we can do to start to address the embedded inequities that come in both the private sector and the public sector. And I'm committed to trying to do our part on the public sector to address that.
Thank you, Assessor Wilson. And I hope that the network will continue to lean in on this issue because it can tend to be quite esoteric in terms of its nature. And if there are ways that the network collectively can really be supportive and give feedback and help amplify the work, please keep most of the partners in the loop on that.
Happily too.
Allison, do you want to close us off here as I transition so we can spend as much time listening to Katisha and talking about mobilization and how we move forward alongside Representative Chop and Donald King?
Absolutely. Thank you, Patience. And just I want to thank everyone who for being here today and those who are presenting and really just, again, reminding us why we're all here and the importance of this work. I know a lot of work has gone on behind the scenes, pulling together a path forward. And I'm always struck by just the partnership aspect, how it is going to take a broad and wide partnership way of working together in multiple pieces to move this needle forward. And so excited for the work ahead and really, again, just thankful for the opportunity to bring us all together today. Reminder what it's about, and the point I've been emphasizing as we talk about policy work or other actions that will be needed to move us forward is always being able to articulate and remind others of how this will move the needle and get to an outcome that we're looking for to increase the Black homeownership rate. And just being clear and articulating that, I'll continue to ask for that. But again, thank you. And I'm looking forward to hearing the next steps about how we can mobilize.
Thank you. And that's a great segue to that next step. And thanks for reminding us that this will take all of us. It's not just one or the other. It's really all of us leaning in to drive this work. Earlier, Representative Chop talked about the power of stories. And I want us to spend time listening to Katisha's story about the great work that she's doing as Urban Black with community partners, and then listening to Donald King about the work they're doing at Nehemiah Initiative and mobilizing for change. And we're including the community organizer here, Representative Chop, to also share some of his pro tips in driving this work, both from a strategy standpoint and from a policy standpoint. So with that, I think the main person to introduce here is Katisha Atterbury, who is the Urban Black leader. Urban Black is a mission-based real estate development, investment, and culture technology firm. It specializes on community-focused, community-driven projects. She is the founder and managing director with 16 plus years of unique real estate development management and public policy experience. You already had us introduce Donald as well as Representative Chop. So in kicking us off for this panel, Katisha, why don't you take us away and talk a little bit about the work of Urban Black, why you are engaged in the Black Home Initiative, and how you see these policies increasing Black home ownership? Because I do want us to continue to peel the layer on the focus on Black households in this work.
Yeah, thank you, Patience. And good morning to everyone here today. We are appreciative to be invited to work here at the Black Homeownership Initiative. And obviously, if Patience has put me on the panel to speak today, then that says she's okay with me telling the truth. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing here at Urban Black. For those who don't know, the majority of my career was spent at the Pike Place Market Preservation and Development Authority. I spent almost 10 years there managing the 9 acres and 11 mixed-use historic properties that make up the market, as well as that consisted of about 225 commercial businesses and 200 or so low-income affordable housing units, as well as 4 civic centers, a food bank, a medical clinic, a senior center, and a childcare, which my children grew up in. So I have market kids, and then also was promoted and did some capital project management work on the renovation, and then also some early conceptual planning and design on the new waterfront project there that you all may see on Western. Where I thought I was going at the time when I considered that work was the Seaport Alliance, essentially to do the same thing. I love my work at the market. I love working within the community. And it was really there that I learned the built environment is really about building the community. And buildings and facilities and homes are really just supportive mechanisms for communities to be able to thrive. But in the middle of that pursuit, it was a calling to start Urban Black, which I thought it was gonna be my retirement gig. But the demand for us as an organization and services and the community to want to be able to have a say in their future called my name, and I answered. Reluctantly, to say the least, with 2 children and no savings to start a business. So they all called me crazy. But I had some good people that served as a support and inspiration and provided mentorship. One of those being Donald King. I'm forever in debt to him. But he and other leaders in our organization have, in the industry, have been a tremendous support. So with that, my own personal story of homeownership comes from the loss of our family home. It was purchased by my grandfather and grandmother. My grandfather was the second in command to the first Black fire chief of Seattle. They own property in the Central District and the Southeast Seattle. And that was the home that my father grew up in, and that later I grew up in, and then also unfortunately was lost to the Weed and Seed program, which was an urban planning strategy to really uproot Black homeownership in the Central District and Southeast Seattle and surrounding areas. So what provided a foundation and stability for myself as a child, and really the catalyst to launch me into what I thought my future was going to be at the time, which was to go to a HBC and probably be a diplomat on the Capitol Hill, and then maybe even go to the Olympics, because I was a gymnast at Garfield, changed. And I ended up couch surfing, working my way through community college, and ran into a few bad news boyfriends. But it's the truth of what a loss of homeownership and foundation for a community, amongst other things, can happen to folks. So I think that the work that we do at Urban Black, we're very much proponents of economic development. We believe that from a holistic standpoint, developing communities is holistic, from housing to economic development, to provide that engine and wealth generation to our communities, as well as needed social services and support systems. This work is not only mission-based, but a calling for myself, and a service to the community. So again, my personal story is really the driving force behind that. I handle a lot of that, what I would consider grief, but then also an opportunity to turn that into purpose, into the work and the projects that we do and have. And we're still moving, and still here to serve. So I'll pause there so I don't get too long-winded, but it's a good start.
Well, it's a grounding start. Thank you, Katisha. And Donald, this is going to be a hard one to follow, but I think you're the sole champion here to build on this big question of, we've done this work with 125 people over the last 3 months, showing up, some in and out. And the big question has been, how do we bring community along? And you are doing that with the Nehemiah Initiative. And how do we make sure that the policies that we're saying are priority and are going to increase Black homeownership are truly representative of the priority of the community? So help us think about how we're tying and weaving that voice, both from the perspective of community, from the perspective of faith-based organizations that you work with, because that is an anchor in the Black community in building that powerful voice.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Katisha. Thanks for the kind words as well, but thanks for your personal story, and the bravery to be able to present that too. And I think all of this requires some bravery on all of our parts, some courage to do the work that we're doing. This is not easy. It is not easy, one, to change the focus and the mindset of a lot of people, including many people in the community. I began actually working on the ideas of churches using their underutilized property maybe 15 years ago. In my community-based architectural practice and a master plan for Mount Zion Church, and the church saying, well, we don't have enough land. We don't have enough land to do the things that we're doing. And part of that rationale was the idea that, we've got a lot of surface parking and we need more surface parking. And having them really begin to think a different way about the use of land, being more vertical, and even before the ideas of, we got to get rid of some of this parking, and we've got to have more density of focus on housing and affordable housing, so the need for the parking goes away. And that's kind of where we are now. So there is still a lot of work to do in being able to bring community along, and having community also be a part of bringing the Nehemiah Initiative along. So this is a mutual partnership that we enter into with the community, in listening to them, and listening to the members and the leaders of our faith-based institutions, and being able to craft and change, and knowing that policy is not just policy set by the hierarchy, it's policy that is set by the hierarchy with the input of everyone, that everyone is important. And I think that's always been part of my philosophy in 40 years of community-based practice, in knowing that every voice is important, and also all needs are justifiable, and we need to listen to people and get that input to really be able to build the best, not only policies, but also the best housing opportunities that we can. So part of what the Nehemiah Initiative is engaged in and will be engaged in after the first of the year is having a listening session. We're not going to go out and just report to this is what we're doing, and this is what we're doing for you. This is not the way we function. This is, we are aligned with the principles of building beloved community, and part of that building beloved community is to make sure that all have input and all have voice in what we do. So we want to make sure that even with our association and our alignment with the policies of the Black Home Initiative, that we make sure that there's plenty of voice in that from people that we're trying to serve, people that we are working with to serve. So I want to make sure that we have a change of mindset, as well as our work to change the mindset of community and other community leaders.
Well, thank you, Donald. And it's such a timely reminder to say, as we're thinking of mobilization, it means activating those voices and letting them lead this work.
That's right.
Well, moving ahead to Representative Chubb, as a community organizer, I know you already talked a lot about the state priorities around this funding program that we're working on through the CRA or CHA bill. I would love to hear a little bit more about any other state priorities that you would like to elevate and encourage folks in terms of engaging beyond Seattle, beyond King County, and beyond the Puget Sound, given that Seattle is a word at the state level that is often not gravitated towards. So any other tips that you have for this network as we think about that mobilization work that's going to be important?
Thanks, Patience, again for all your work, and I really appreciate our partnership on moving forward the Covenant Homeownership account. The other major thing, there's other ideas as well, but another major source that we're working on legislation is to provide a ongoing significant funding source for the Housing Trust Fund. Up to this point, it's every 2 years we try to allocate money out of the capital budget, so we have to generate support literally every year to add more money there. Now, the governor has proposed some increase of funding, but we're not sure how realistic his proposal, which is to sell bonds over the next 6 years. I'm working with him and others to figure out how to do that, but we do have a funding source that could be utilized to provide the debt service on those $4 billion of bonds, which you probably saw in the paper, or consult his website is now public. So that's a big deal, and working with Patience and Bambi and others, also a guy named Tony Yukas, who's works with me all the time on generating support for that, because you can't build housing without resources, and you really need resources to turn the rhetoric into reality. Otherwise, it's just rhetoric, which is important, by the way. And so the Covenant Homeownership account actually would generate $150 million per year on average over the next generation of 20 years. That's $3 billion we're talking about in terms of helping folks in terms of home ownership. So I don't want to necessarily mention that to legislators, how that number, because some of them might freak out a little bit. But the point is that it's a logical fund source, and it's an assessment on document recordings, and that's the nexus to the actual recording, the state's recording of these documents with all this racist language. And so but whenever you talk about resources, that means you need obviously votes. So as part of the partnership here, I can focus in on that part as well as refining the legislation, which any number of you could help refine the legislation as it goes forward. So if people are interested in helping on the legislative advocacy front, which is a community organizing effort, if you could send those who are willing to be part of a team to do that, if you could let Bambi know that, and also my legislative assistant, Jean Balbon, so we could coordinate calling in the troops when we need to, or calling in the testimony or the stories that we need to. We also would greatly appreciate public endorsements. There are a number of people on this call that obviously probably all of you have connections with organizations that have a lot of credibility, but we need that visible public endorsement of the proposal. Not that anything is perfect, by the way. The legislature is not known for perfection. That's an understatement. So consequently, we'll do the best we can. I think we have real significant support to do something this next session, but that starts the second week in January. And so we can't waste time. We have to get on to the next thing here. We also would greatly appreciate if any of you have a positive relationship with any of the legislators, because it really boils down to those connections. I know that in the past, obviously, that's been a problem for many issues, but I think we have folks in the legislature who would be very open to your advocacy. It just helps if you happen to know, hey, I know this legislator from Bainbridge Island, for example. Okay, let us know that so we can think through how you could constructively talk to them. And then the last part is that we need to settle on a message piece that patients at Bambi are helping draft in terms of the basic, like one-page message of this idea. And we just pretty much have to stick to the message, because the other side of the aisle, I don't know if you ever heard of them, they tend to want to have very divisive debates and get us distracted from our cause. So we have to make sure we don't take the bait. I mean, even though they may say not so good things. And so we just got to be a little focused, shall we say, to focus in our message on our cause and the votes. And that's what I can help contribute to this effort, but we really need your help. Have this many people on this call, but also the large number of people. Like Donald, it represents an effort or project that represents a lot of churches. They have members, and they could help, sign in at public testimony, even if it's remote or virtual, and make an impact. So does that answer the question? Patience, I hope that was okay.
Absolutely does. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, an hour and a half was still not enough for this great conversation. We've come to the top tier end of the hour. I do want to close by just building on what Donald, Patricia, and Representative Chop just shared, which is we're doing this work as a network. It's going to take all of us rolling up our sleeves, activating the communities that we work with to be active in this work. That's what mobilization means. It means we're this big network of hundreds of people, but we have thousands and thousands of others that we're connected with. And it is incumbent on all of you to activate those communities to get engaged. So I hope that with this conclusion of a framework in place around policies, you're reminded of the work ahead of you to make the change possible. And with that, I do want to acknowledge that we were graced by the presence of Representative-elect Emily Alvarado in this room, and we're excited to work with her as she begins session next year. And then let me give you one fact that you may want to think over as you prepare for your mobilization, which is research from the Federal Reserve shows that white households hold 86.8% of overall wealth in the country, while they account for 68% of the population. And in comparison, Black households hold only 2.9%, while they account for 15.6% of the wealth. Let's close by saying that number is unacceptable. And the work to change that is incumbent upon all of us. And with that, thank you all for a wonderful session this morning.